Let's build the classic Canadian wall clock. Today I'm going to show you the process step by step on how to build one of these. So let's dive right in. The first thing that we're going to need is a beautiful piece of cherry. Here it is. Let's get started. Now I've already chosen the section of material that we're going to work with. So our next step is going to be to cut it down to size. And because we are making a 10-inch wall clock, I recommend cutting it a little bit long. That way we have a little bit of additional room to work with when we get to the section on cutting the circumference of the clock itself. Now that we have our blank, we really only have one more step before getting into the work of it. We don't have to worry about our sides being square, but we do have to worry about our face and the bottom being flat. Now, if you've already got a piece of stock that is reasonably flat, you could just hit it with your hand sander, or alternatively, if it's not, use a router sled, a planer, a joiner if it's large enough, drum sander, whatever it might be, but we do have to have flat surfaces for this next step. Once we have a nice smooth surface, we need to get our center point. Now, don't stress if you don't remember algebra from school. There's a very easy way, and I'm going to show you how. You'll need to get yourself one of these very high-end, straight-edge center finders. You'll be able to find it probably in most scrap bins. What you need to do is go diagonally from corner to corner, mark somewhere where you think might be center, and then again, from the opposite side, corner to corner, and mark somewhere that you might be center. Don't worry if the center point isn't exactly perfect. We've given ourselves some additional length and width to work with, but for this next part, we are going to have to drill through that center point for our clock mechanism. Now, to get our circumference, I'm going to recommend building a couple jigs. This is going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. If you're planning on making clocks or coasters or pretty well cutting anything circular, I would recommend making a jig, something similar to this. Now, it doesn't have to be so intricate, but I do plan on making a lot of these, so this is the design I've come up with. It's simple. It's a board with a runner on the bottom for our table saw, and I have a T-track bolt that slides right in. Now, this bolt is smaller than the mechanism that we're going to be using in our clock, and I did that purposely. And I also added a washer there so we have somewhere for our material to sit and spin on rather than sitting directly on the board. It's going to make your life a lot easier. For holding it down, I just cut a round piece of MDF and put an insert in it. That way we can thread it on and lock our material in place. Now, this is great for clocks, but you're going to be putting a hole through your material. If you're wanting to do something more like a round circle for a table or make coasters, that's what these little dots here are for. These are just drilled out marks with a cut nail. That way you have a center point, you can put it on, spin it around. It works absolutely fantastic. So if you are going to be cutting circles, clocks, anything like that, this is definitely a jig that I would recommend building. And I do have a build video in my previous posts. I know, I'm sorry, but we do have a little bit of math here, okay, guys? It's really quite simple. Let me walk you through it. We have a 10-inch wall clock, okay? But our center point is quite literally a center point. So we have 5 inches. That's going to be our radius, all right? All we have to do on our jig is move our center point, that's going to be our pivot point, to 5 inches, and that's going to cut us a 10-inch clock. Now, I'd recommend going a little bit more than 5 inches for the simple reason that you can always cut more off, but you will never get it all back. Now, this is a mistake I've made on more than one occasion, all right? When you start cutting it, take off small sections at a time. If you start cutting big sections away, you're going to end up with flat spots on your circle. So like I said, make small cuts to start with. And I also recommend having a scrap piece of wood on hand. That way you can flick away the little off-cut pieces and they don't jam up your blade. Now that we have our rough circle cut, you can see that we're left with a lot of flat spots. So what I do is I move it in ever so slightly. That way we can make nice clean cuts all the way around, and really all we have to do is rotate. If you take your time and you're patient with your cuts, you'll be left with a nice smooth circle every time. We have our circle. Now, off camera, I re-drilled this hole larger to accommodate for the clock mechanism because initially it was only drilled to size for our jig. Now, this next step is a personal preference of mine. All of my clocks get sanded from 150 grit to 600 grit. Now, I don't do my final sand before I have the engraving on the actual clock. That way, it doesn't take away too much detail when I do complete my final sand. If you're looking to get into engraving or you're a seasoned pro, this would hands down be the unit that I would recommend to you, the SculptFun S9. Now, unlike most engravers out there that are encased and closed, you have to actually put your product or your piece inside to engrave your picture. This one has an open base, so I can quite literally take it and set it on, let's say, a tabletop and design my picture into multiple pieces to attain any size that I want. Now that our clock face has been engraved, we have one more major step before getting to the best part, which is finishing, and that is adding this clock mechanism into the back. Now, I found the easiest way to replicate it perfectly on every single clock is to make a little MDF template, take 4 pieces, glue them together tight around your clock mechanism, add some double-sided tape to it, and then all you have to do is drop it in place, press it down, and you have a perfect fit. And just like that, you have a perfect cutout for your clock mechanism. Here is my favorite part to every project, adding the finish. And there is nothing I would rather use than walrus oil furniture butter on any of my clocks, really. Okay, now that we've let our piece sit for 24 hours with the walrus oil on it, it is time to buff off the excess and add our mechanism, our clock hands, and a hook. And that's it. And there you have it, your very own classic Canadian wall clock. If you guys have any questions about any of the equipment that I've used, any of the materials, feel free, leave me a comment, send me a message on this platform, or an email at blackwalnutjoinery@gmail.com. And as always, thank you guys so much for your support. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I love you all.